Woman gives birth to world's oldest baby. Discover the story that shocked the world. In April 1992, Vanessa Williams' Save the Best for Last topped the Billboard 100. Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton was running for the White House. Who's the Boss aired its final episode, and the babies born to Rachel and Philip Ridgway a couple of weeks ago were frozen as embryos. Born on October 31, Lydia and Timothy Ridgway were born from what may be the longest frozen embryos to ever result in a live birth, according to the National Embryo Donation Center. The previous known record holder was Molly Gibson, born in 2020 from an embryo that had been frozen for nearly 27 years. Molly took the record from her sister Emma, who was born from an embryo that had been frozen for 24 years. It's possible an older frozen embryo may have been used, although the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention tracks success rates and data around reproductive technologies. It does not track how long embryos have been frozen, but there's no evidence from an older embryo resulting in a live birth. There's something mind-boggling about it, Philip Ridgway said, as he and his wife cradled their newborns in their laps at their home outside Portland, Oregon. I was 5 years old when God gave life to Lydia and Timothy, and He's been preserving that life ever since. In a sense, they're our oldest children, even though they're our smallest children, Ridgway added. The Ridgways have 4 other children, ages 8, 6, 3, and almost 2, none conceived via IVF or donors. The embryos were created for an anonymous married couple using in vitro fertilization. The husband was in his early 50s, and they used a 34-year-old egg donor. The embryos were frozen on April 22, 1992. For nearly 3 decades, they sat in storage on tiny straws, kept in liquid nitrogen at nearly 200 degrees below zero in a device that looks much like a propane tank. The embryos were kept at a fertility lab on the West Coast until 2007, when the couple who created them donated the embryos to the National Embryo Donation Center in Knoxville, Tennessee, in hopes another couple might be able to use them. The 5 embryos were overnighted in specially outfitted tanks to Knoxville, said Dr. John Gordon, the Ridgways' doctor. We've never had in our minds a set number of children we'd like to have, Philip said. We've always thought we'll have as many as God wants to give us, and when we heard about embryo adoption, we thought that's something we'd like to do. Understanding embryo donation. The medical name for the process the Ridgways went through is embryo donation. When people undergo IVF, they may produce more embryos than they use. Extra embryos can be cryopreserved for future use, donated to research or training to advance the science of reproductive medicine, or donated to people who would like to have children. As with any other human tissue donation, embryos must meet certain U.S. Food and Drug Administration eligibility guidelines to be donated, including being screened for certain infectious diseases. Embryo adoption is not legal adoption at all, at least in the sense of a traditional adoption which occurs after birth, the National Embryo Donation Center says. However, the term allows all parties to conceptualize the process and eventual reality of raising a non-genetically related child. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine says application of the term adoption to embryos is inaccurate, is misleading, and could place burdens on recipients and should be avoided. Many colloquially call the donor process embryo adoption, but adoption and donation are not one and the same, said Dr. Sigel Klipstein, a Chicago-based fertility specialist and chair of the American Society of Reproductive Medicine's Ethics Committee. Adoption refers to living children, Klipstein said. It's a legal process by which a parent-child relationship is created when it did not previously exist. Embryo donation, she said, is a medical procedure. It's a way by which we take embryos from one couple or individual and then transfer them into another individual in order to build families. Some people in the U.S. are rushing to get sterilized after the Roe v. Wade ruling. The phrase adoption has become wrapped up in a larger cultural debate, used predominantly by those in faith-based communities with conservative leanings. The National Embryo Donation Center is a private, Christian-led organization. It requires recipients to pass a family assessment and says couples must be a genetic male and a genetic female, married for a minimum of 3 years. The center says it has helped with the births of over 1,260 infants from donated embryos. Klipstein says that using donated embryos can often be cost-effective for people looking for fertility help, as it cuts out the price of looking for and storing donor sperm and eggs. They don't get the genetic connection to the children, she said, but they do have a much less expensive reproductive option than even with in vitro fertilization in most cases. We just wanted the ones that had been waiting the longest. For the Ridgways, building their family was always part of a larger calling. We weren't looking to get the embryos that have been frozen the longest in the world, Philip Ridgway said. We just wanted the ones that had been waiting the longest. When looking for donors, the Ridgways specifically asked the donation center about a category called special consideration, meaning it had been hard to find recipients for these embryos for whatever reason. The Ridgways assumed those listed with earlier donor numbers had been at the center the longest and tried to narrow their choice to those profiles. Rachel remembers Gordon handing her a picture of the 3 embryos and recommending they transfer only 2, telling her multiples can cause problems in pregnancy, but she said there was no question in her mind that they would transfer all 3. She remembers getting teary-eyed and saying, "You just showed me a picture of my 3 children. I have to have them all."